Hi everyone, it is 2 p.m. and so we are going to go ahead and begin our webinar this afternoon on conducting open houses. Scott Monahan, our career development coach with Princeton School of Real Estate, will be leading our webinar in just a few moments. This is Courtney Graham on right now, so just a little overview of how today is going to go. Scott is going to lead our webinar. I'm going to mute everyone on the call just so we can eliminate any background noise. And then at the end, I will unmute everyone and we will take any questions that you all might have. So let me go ahead and mute and we will go ahead and get started.
All participants are muted, but may unmute themselves. All participants are muted and may not unmute themselves.
Okay. We're ready to go.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar titled Conducting Open Houses. I'm Scott Monahan, Career Development Coach for Princeton School of Real Estate. This webinar will be a step-by-step walkthrough of the procedures for conducting an open house. This will also be available on the Wydell Hub for future reference. Our open house discussion will also be continued on Friday as part of the ProStart training module. So let's begin. Question is, why should I conduct open houses? Open houses are an integral part of the new agent business planning that we've been teaching in our ProStart series. The new agent business planning is identified as sphere of influence activities, phone time or opportunity time in your offices, and then the third part of the business development plan is open house marketing. So there are three basic types of open houses. I would identify them as public, broker open houses, and the third being either tour or caravan open houses for agents. Today we're going to focus on the public open houses. What should we expect as a result of conducting open houses? Well, first, how often should we commit to running open houses as a new agent? I would suggest that the minimum be at least once per month and probably twice a month. Nobody is suggesting that agents tie up every Sunday for the entire year, year in and year out. That's just not realistic. But if you are just developing your business, conducting one or two open houses per month done properly can be very profitable. So now let's do the math. If we were to properly conduct an open house, according to the National Association of Realtors, for every 15 people that attend your open house, you could expect that one will buy. Another way to look at it is to say, if I did one open house per month and had 12 attendees, that would be 12 open houses in the course of a year, 12 attendees for each open house. That would be 144 prospects. Truth is, I'd like to be much more conservative than that. And if I were to say that if we conducted the open house properly and we had 6 viable prospects that showed up for the open house, then the math would be 12 open houses on an annualized basis times 6 prospects per open house, or a total of 72 prospects. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to hold on to that number, that 72 number, just for a couple of minutes, and I'll come back to it. Now, let's talk about who shows up for an open house. If an open house is properly conducted, one of the 3 types of attendees that will show up would undoubtedly be sellers. If we've done the right kind of marketing in the neighborhood, we will have neighbors that will end up coming through the house. Sellers are always interested in knowing what the value of their house is, no matter when they bought and until the time they sell. The reason that sellers will come is that some of them may be considering a potential sale of their property in the near future. So that's a valuable part of the reason for doing an open house. Buyers I would categorize as 2 types. Those that are looking for a house and conceivably have not yet identified an agent that they want to work with. That's our prime prospect for an open house. It tends to be that people will drive around, they'll look at houses for a little while until they become convinced that this is the right time for them and they should be doing this, or that they've met the right agent. So potentially an agent or a buyer could come through that has already associated with another agent, but practically speaking, open houses are a very good way to find uncommitted buyers. And then there are the buyers that are just perpetual lookers, and we're going to discount them for the time being. So now let's go back to the math. If you remember, I asked you to hold on to that number 72. If you conducted 12 open houses in a year with only 6, now remember we might have had 10 or 12 people come through on average, but if we concluded that only 6 were attending each open house, well, that's the 72 prospects that I mentioned. Now let's discount the lookers. So if out of 72 people that came through on an annualized basis, 22 of them, and I just made up that number, you can conclude whatever number you want, but that would leave 50 people that have come through the open house who are going to either buy now or in the future. My question is, what are the odds that we'll be able to do business with just 2 of those 50 people in the course of a year? I think the odds are phenomenally good. In fact, I would expect that we would probably do business with more than 2. But let's just use 2 for an example. Now consider that the average agent commission income in your office, and you'll have to make the determination as to what the average income is on your check on an average sale, but let's say it's $3,500, maybe it's $4,000, maybe it's $5,000. You make that determination, but if you were to do the calculations, 2 successful open house transactions in the course of a year times either $35,000 or $5,000 per check, well, that endeavor's worth $7,000 to $10,000 a year. So it makes it worthwhile to spend a couple of Sundays in the course of a year doing open houses. And that's only if you had 1 per month. If you did 2 open houses per month, number one, the prospect list goes from 72 to 144, and the odds of doing business with 4 or more are greater, which would take your income to between $14,000 and $20,000. So open houses are an excellent way to get your business started. Now let's talk about actually conducting the open house. There are 3 stages of conducting the open house. The first one is what I would call preparation. And if you've ever heard the term the 80-20 rule, 80% is preparation and 20% is presentation. So this is probably the most important part of the preparation period, and that is the selection of the open house. And I'm going to give you some criteria. This is not etched in stone, but the more that you participate with houses that have a higher degree of getting sold on your open houses, the more successful you're going to be. So you can either conduct an open house on one of your own listings, or if your listing inventory does not meet the criteria that we're looking for here, you can ask another agent for permission to conduct an open house on one of their listings. Now, the considerations, which houses should we do open houses with? First, I think you have to consider traffic and accessibility. If the home is beautiful, but it's in a very remote part of the countryside and it's not going to draw a lot of activity, it's probably not a very good candidate for open houses. Whereas if the home is in a subdivision, it wouldn't have to be in a subdivision, but if it were in a subdivision which is fairly easy accessible and has good curb appeal and people would be familiar and it would be desirable, that would be one of your best candidates for an open house. So traffic and accessibility would be consideration number 1. Number 2, I would put at curb appeal. How does the house look? When somebody drives past the house, would it be something that would be enticing enough for them to want to go in? And then third would be price and condition. It can be in the nicest house, in the nicest location, but if it is in poor condition inside, it's going to reflect on you and the clientele that you bring into the house as to whether they think that's the type of quality properties that you would be finding for them. And so price and condition would be a consideration. So not all listings may be appropriate for an open house. Now let's talk about pre-marketing. And with regards to pre-marketing, you can go on to the Wydell Hub, and there is a section within the Wydell Hub as to how to conduct all the tools that you would need to conduct a successful open house. I'm going to give you a list, some of which may be new material for us, but these are the pre-marketing tools and notions that you should consider before doing an open house. First of which is distribution of invitations to the surrounding neighbors. Now, if you were doing just listed cards, you've heard of 5-10-5, where you promote to five of the homes on one side of the house, 5 of the homes on the other, and 10 across the street. My thought about that is probably one of the most useful tools that you can be doing to promote the open house, because it will put you potentially in contact with others that are thinking about selling their houses. I would say that the 5-10-5 is probably a minimal amount of houses that you might distribute an open house invitation to. The next would be the publication of the open house in the multiple listing service. The advertisement that relates to open houses through all of the marketing websites and the like originally or are originated from the multiple listing service. So what I'm going to suggest is that if you don't know how to publish an open house in the multiple listing service, I would talk to your office supervisor who can help you accomplish that. Number 3, advanced sign placements. Now what we're talking about there is potentially the open house sign in front of the home, and perhaps, and I caution you on this one, some directional signs. If you were to place signs in advance of the day of the open house, however, your sign should specify the specific date and time of the open house. If you can have a leader of, a couple of days notice that the signage is out there, that will greatly impact your open house. So advanced sign placement is very important. Next, I would suggest that you tour the neighborhood for your competitors' houses that may be for sale. There could be a for sale by owner. If that were the case, I would contact the owner and find out whether they will cooperate with us, at least find out the details of the offering, and any other additional information that would be specific to the area. Is there construction going on in road work nearby, or anything that you might discern by driving past the house in advance? All right, moving along. Let's talk about the tools that you would need to run an open house. These are the things that you want to physically bring to the open house. And I have a list. And if you are doing open houses on a regular basis, you'll have a package of these things readily available. But it's important that we go down the list. Number 1 is the open house guest registry. Now, the one that is on the Wydell Hub is particularly good because it has some questions right on it that may be appropriate to ask the buyer prospects that come through the house. We're going to talk about how to conduct the walkthrough and ask questions in a couple of minutes. Number 2, you should have copies of the consumer notice if you are a Pennsylvania agent, or in New Jersey, the CIS forms. That's a requirement of the law, and you need to have that available. Number 3, if you've heard me conduct any of these webinars before, I have been very consistent to say that I believe in what's called an introduction folder. That would be a folder that would have on the left side your bio or your resume, a copy of the flyer for leading real estate, a flyer that includes maximum exposure at Wydell, and our culture brochure. That should be on the left side. On the right side, what I believe should be put in there is a copy of the MLS profile for the specific open house that you're running, and if you choose to go the next step, a copy of the tax records, and obviously an attached copy of your business card. This should become absolutely routine. I would recommend that you only have about 6 of them handy. It's not that I would give everybody that walks through the house one of your introductory folders, but if you are engaged in a conversation with somebody that goes beyond the meet and greet, then I think it would be appropriate for you to introduce yourself in a more conclusive way. Number 4, copies of the house brochure or the MLS printout. So whereas I said that you might have 6 of the introductory folders handy, if you were to get 12 or 14 or even considerably more than that that come through the house, I think that you probably will not engage in a meaningful conversation with all of them if you have that kind of activity, but you do need to get information out, which would include the MLS form or the promotional flyer for your house and a copy of your business card. Number 5. Some of you may be familiar with this, but if you are not, would be a flyer that is the Princeton Mortgage Financing Workup for the subject property, showing how much down payment would be required under conventional terms or some of the other mortgage programs that would be applicable to that house, the cost of the monthly payments and the like. If you're not familiar with this, you can see your Princeton Mortgage representative and they'll be happy to get that for you. Number 6 is a new one on our list, and that is the Neighborhood News sign-up flyer. And the purpose of this is to build your sphere of influence. And so with that, I think that this will be on the hub, and it would be appropriate for you to make a copy of it. It has a picture of a house on it. It has a description of what a potential recipient would get from Neighborhood News. And it's a very non-threatening way to get all of the information that you would want from the buyers. Number 7, copies of additional houses for sale that are similar to the open house that you're running. Now, what I would suggest is that if you have a little bit of that information, similar houses, that should not be put on display for anyone to pick up as they walk through the house. I would keep it in a folder for use with a buyer who's engaged you in a conversation and potentially was not interested in this house. So it gives you something more to talk about. Number 8, you may be surprised to hear this one, but I would always bring my Wydell Seller Services book. That is typically the book that you would use on a listing consultation. If you think about who the 3 types of buyers are that come through, or 3 types of prospects that come through an open house, one of which we identified as potential sellers. If you were to engage not in a listing presentation, but in a question or two that relates to the Wydell services, it would be very, very appropriate to be able to turn to the page and just give them some thoughtful advice. Number 9, last but not least, I think that the odds of you writing an offer on the first walkthrough are slim to none. But nonetheless, if somebody walked in and said, you know, I've been watching this house forever, how do we get together and sit down and buy this? I think you ought to have an offer to purchase, just in case. So, those are the highlights of those items that should be present for you in the open house when you're conducting the open house. You may be well aware of this, but lastly, I would say that if you have the availability of helium balloons to be able to put on some of the signs, I think that that's very, very appropriate to draw attention. Directional signs from all appropriate directions. Directional signs are one of the biggest draws to an open house, and then obviously the open house yard sign. So now that we've gotten through stage 1, let's go through stage 2, which is conducting the open house. I only have a couple of points here, but they are extremely valuable in the conducting of an open house. 1 through 4 that I'm going to go through right now are pretty simple. The first of which is open on time. Be prepared and ready at the time that the open house is to begin. If you've watched people go to yard sales and the like, there are those people that feel that early, even 5 minutes before a yard sale starts, or it could be an open house if they're interested, they want to get there before the other people go through. So be there on time, ready and prepared. All lights on. As much as possible within the house, shades open, curtains open, lots of light. I carry a can of air freshener in my trunk. There are times that I'll walk into a house that I might be running an open house that smells a little bit stale for whatever reason. Have an air freshener that's available to you. Don't go rummaging through the seller's property. And then lastly, and this will take some sensitivity in the preparation of the open house, but the seller should not be present for the open house. By inviting the public in, it's much more conducive to have a conversation with strangers if the sellers are no longer present in the house. So now let's talk about the purpose of an open house. And this is one of those succinct things that if you want to highlight on your notes, the purpose, the one and only purpose of an open house is to schedule an appointment to meet with any prospect, again, a second appointment, and or reach a commitment for the next point of contact, whether that be in person, on the telephone, whether you're going to send them some information. But the odds of you selling that house on the spot are negligible. So for every person that walks through the house, the only thing that you can obtain out of that is information about them, and specifically, you should be seeking to get an appointment, another reason to meet with them, and or a point of contact to send them some additional information when they are expecting you to call, both time and date. So if you think about it, you only have about 8 minutes with every prospect. So the objective is, don't try and sell the house unless they insist that they want to buy it, which will be rare to never. And so let's walk through how you're going to do this. Number one is meet and greet. Say hello, no scripts, just be very, very low key. Invite them in, tell them that you're happy to let them walk through the house. And then as they get to the point where you have some of your materials either on the dining room table or on the kitchen island or something like that, then stop them and offer them information. So give them a sheet on the house, give them the Princeton Mortgage flyer. At that time, you would be asking them to sign in the guest registry. Now, if there's any resistance with respect to them signing in the guest registry, it would be very appropriate for you to tell them that since the sellers have given you the courtesy to let buyers come through the house, your obligation is to keep track of who comes through. At that point, you can decide that you might want to offer them neighborhood news, or you might just let it aside. But in any case, that's where having a copy of the consumer notice or the CIS form would be very appropriate to say that by signing either the CIS or the consumer notice, it allows you to be a dual agent and represent both buyers and sellers. Next, walk through the house with the prospect. They should not be walking through by themselves, but you want to keep the conversation very light. Now, there were some questions that were on the guest registry. Effectively, what you want to do is you want to ask how long they might have been looking for a house. Number two, are they working potentially with another agent? Number three, in the prospect of buying a new house, do they have another house that they would have to sell first? And then ultimately, as they go through it, very, very low key, you might ask them, obviously, whether they like the house that they're walking through with you. The objective, and I can't repeat this enough, would be to then close. And the objective is to schedule another appointment with the prospect for either to get together in your office to maybe show them what houses are available, maybe get a chance to walk through their existing home if selling their house is part of the equation. Whatever it takes to find a reason for them to have a need to get back with you. And if you have not addressed neighborhood news, as long as they're looking, they took the time to go to an open house, well then why not get neighborhood news? Either for the prospect that are the areas that they're looking for or where they currently live. So that's pretty much of step two. Step three, after the open house. These are going to seem very obvious, but nonetheless, they're important just the same. Put the house back into the same condition with which you found it. And that means that the curtains and the drapes go back to their original position, the lights go off, and you make sure that the house is locked up. Obviously, the next step would be to remove any and all signs. If you put directional signs up, it is very, very appropriate for you to ask permission of the homeowner before you put them up, and it would be appropriate for you to knock on the door and let them know that you took them down as promised. Nothing irritates potential homeowners when somebody takes advantage and puts a sign on their property without asking permission. Next, call the seller with a full detailed report as to how the open house went. As long as they've opened the house up and let people through, they are going to be extremely curious as to how the open house went. Next, within 24 hours, you should be sending thank yous to everybody on your registry. And lastly, at your first opportunity back into the office or on your home computer, add those people that you signed up for Neighborhood News to the Neighborhood News website, and on MoxieWorks on your CRM, put together those people into your sphere of influence list. So, the last thing that I'd like to talk to you about today is that if you recall from our seller consultation, we had presented to the seller a personal marketing plan, which was an adaptation of the marketing activities calendar, and it's part of your seller services book. I'd like you to take a look at that. It's on the screen, and if we look at it and we say, well, by doing the open house, what have we accomplished out of our commitments that we made to the seller? So I'm just going to very quickly go down the list, and I'm going to say number one was set up a photo shoot of the interior and exterior of the property. Well, if you processed the listing and then you did the open house and did all the necessary flyers, I'm going to presume that that one was done, so we'll put a check there. Made necessary keys and installed the lockbox on the property. Well, if the owner met you at the house and then gave you access to run the open house and they left, that's fine. But I'm presuming that you've made all necessary arrangements for showings. Place the property on the MLS service and reviewed for accuracy. Well, if our open house is being published through the MLS service, that means that the house must have been already published onto the MLS. Check that one off. Prepared the property profile sheet and ad copy. Well, one of our tools that we used was the MLS or a flyer for the house at the open house, so we've now accomplished that one. Determine sign placement and directional sign placement. Again, that coincides exactly with doing your first open house. So right there, we have now concluded the first 5 of those items that we promised on the marketing plan. The next one, place property profile sheet in the home along with Princeton mortgage financing information. If we did the open house early on in the offering of our listing, which would be highly advisable, I would leave some of that information prominently displayed in the house after the open house was done, if it hadn't been there already before. Created, I'm going to skip down an item or two, created and mailed just listed cards. Well, the just listed cards would go to potential neighbors in the area. They could go to your sphere of influence, but again, further down on the list, you're going to find that the visited the neighbors and prospects to do the 5-10-5. Well, whether you mailed the just listed cards or you walked through the neighborhood with an invitation to an open house, I think in that case you've now accomplished both of those items. Place the home on Realtor.com, Wydell.com, Trillia, Zillow. Well, by putting it in the multiple listing service, we've accomplished that. By putting the open house into the MLS, we've now gotten it onto Zillow and some of the ancillary websites that relate to open houses. Next one, hosted brokers open or collected feedback for a public open house. We're going to assume that the one that we've accomplished is the public open house, and so now we've accomplished that one. Reviewed showing feedback. Well, by calling the sellers back with the activities that took place during the open house, we've accomplished that, which would also be a seller weekly update. Now, I'm not suggesting that you run an open house on the same house week in and week out. And then obviously, as I've previously stated, personally visited the neighbors and prospects for the 5-10-5s. So you see that by running an open house meets a number of objectives. Number one, it is one of the premier ways for a new agent or an existing agent to get clientele without having to pay for the prospects. Number two, it helps you build your sphere of influence for future prospecting. And number three, it accomplishes a major part of your marketing commitments that you made to the seller when you listed the house. So hopefully that gives you some idea of how to run an open house. We will be discussing open houses and other marketing ideas in the ProStart module on Friday, and we look forward to seeing all of you there. This concludes the educational portion of this. We'll take questions, so I'm going to turn the meeting back over to Courtney Graham.
Thanks, Scott. We will go ahead and unmute you all so that we can take any questions if necessary.
All participants are unmuted.
Okay, so the line has been unmuted, so if anyone has any questions, you may ask them now. Okay, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We greatly appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you all on Friday for our ProStart module starting at 9 a.m. Thanks, and see you then.